I'm David Rosenthal, the Mortgage Center, and we are very thankful for this opportunity to discuss the project. We're also thankful for a $5,000 community-based research grant that enabled us to pair with community structures within the Arcatao, and we'll be talking about how we've used existing structures within this project to ensure sustainability. The project's been supported over time. The initial funding was a Grand Challenges grant through the School of Education. We have a $9,000 grant from NIA Global, and a project and initiative that some individuals came down to El Salvador and been conducting some of the work. A $5,000 community-based research grant from the Mortgage Center, and benefit concerts that we've probably gotten about $4,000 or $5,000, because my brother and I play in a band and try to cookie sales and benefit concerts in any way we can sustain this project. And the Mortgage Center has been a big deal, or important player in that. The project emanated from many years, decades of work, and I'm gonna defer to my brother in terms of some of the early solidarity work, the sister city projects that were developed during the war to testify some of the atrocities that were actually going on. I went down to El Salvador in 1998 for the first time. I've been back quite a few times, and we began discussions probably in around 2014, 2015, in terms of mental health services in El Salvador, and realizing that there were very few or no existing mental health services available within the community of Arcatao. So this project was mutually generated through requests from the community, and it's really important to us that it was a mutually generated, and then UW kind of took the lead in some of the development of the project, but it's absolutely crucial that we utilize existing structures within the community, within the region, and have this as a community-led project. So it's evolving in that direction. And I want to thank the Mortgage Center we used the $5,000 from the Mortgage Center to enable us to pair with some of these communities. I just licked my finger and worked with a mask on. So we stand on the shoulders of this incredible work that's been done for decades. We really are hoping to expand the project in some ways. We're looking for some other grants to support the work, and in expansion, we would be looking at increased services for women, pairing with the schools and serving adolescents, expanding geographically, especially women. Services for women are especially important at this point in time because of the COVID-19, and domestic abuse has been soaring around the world, and certainly we see that in El Salvador, and particularly also in Arcatao. So there's, and then we also want to train more individuals, train the trainer model to sustain this work within the community. So very, water. I just choked. I'm sorry. Okay, so as I mentioned, the work has been ongoing for many decades. As a young man, I observed my brother going down to El Salvador in the mid-'80s, and my parents and I were like, this is really dangerous work. He's crossing into a war zone. I'm not sure why he's doing this. His work and the work of many, many people in Madison and certainly in Arcatao are really our project is the result of that excellent work. So Marc Rosenthal, please. Let's do introductions first. I'm sorry. I'm David Rosenthal, professor and area chair of the rehabilitation psychology programs here in Madison. So Hannah, you want to?
Sure. My name is Hannah Fry. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the Rehabilitation Counselor Education Program.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yazmin Castruita Rios, and I'm a third-year PhD student in the Rehab Counselor Education Program here at UW. We have Xiaolei joining us virtually.
Hello, everyone. My name is Xiaolei Tang. I just graduated in the summer, and I'm now teaching at Arkansas Tech University. So greetings from Arkansas.
So I'm Marc. I'm a retired emergency room nurse. I got my degree here at the University of Wisconsin. I currently do street medicine with homeless folks in Madison as a nurse.
So Marc is going to embellish some of the historical entities and progression of this project.
So I'm going to try and cover 500 years in 7 minutes, and we'll see how we do. But I really want to give a real context to this. And I'll start with that El Salvador is the size of Massachusetts. It's 160 miles across, 60 miles wide. It's the second most densely populated country in the Americas. The Spanish came in 1524 and they were looking for gold and silver. They didn't find gold and silver, but they, with great violence and great brutality, established a hacienda system, export agriculture, indigo, cotton, sugar, coffee. The people who controlled those haciendas, who owned those haciendas, became the oligarchy. They became the ruling elite. The government itself was run by the military, who also protected those haciendas. The indigenous people, the people who lived there, were basically enslaved and forced to work on the haciendas. It's a very brutal system. This pretty much stayed in place right up until 1821, when the Spanish were forced out. 1850, you've got the Monroe Doctrine. The US becomes the dominant force. And the most important point is that nothing changes. The same oligarchs still control the haciendas. The military dictatorship is there, but it's now supported by the United States. Things get really, really grim around 1930. People are starving. And there's a rebellion. 1932, there's a rebellion called La Matanza. It's the Great Death, because it was a huge failure. 30 to 35,000 indigenous people are hunted down and killed in about 2 months. Mostly indigenous are part of this rebellion. So nothing changes in terms of any sort of attempted social change. Right up until the 1960s, 2 things happened. In 1959, you have a revolution in Cuba, which really galvanizes the ideas and expectations as a model of the possibility of change, okay? The other thing is that in 1962, you have the advent of liberation theology. This is huge and creates a revolution throughout Central America. The Catholic Church historically had been part of the ruling clique elite. You are a landlord because it's God's will. You're a peasant because your child died of malnutrition, part of God's plan, but there's heaven and everything will be okay. Starting in 62, there's a part of the church that is saying, no, actually, it's not God's plan. God's plan is for you to build heaven on earth. Meaning we are engaging in social change. And this actually plays out throughout Central America. In El Salvador, campesinos in the area that we're talking about, northern El Salvador, Chaltenango, begin to organize around basic literacy, healthcare, access to fertilizers, access to seeds. And in the early 70s, they're met with an extreme violent repression. And throughout the 70s, you have organizing repression, organizing more repression. And this dance of extreme violence, of death squads, of murder, assassination, torture, disappearance, escalates throughout the 70s until you have a civil war starting in 79 or 80. Probably some people think about the beginning, the real beginning of the Civil War was the assassination of Archbishop Romero, who was seen as the voice of the poor. This archbishop is assassinated by US death squads headed by Roberto Dobasan, who was trained at Fort Bragg at the School of the Americas. Unfortunately, the US sees this civil war totally through the lens of the Cold War. and we support this military dictatorship, and we begin to wage war in Central America. We're spending $2.2 million a day. We are arming and training this military in a very, very brutal context. In 1980 alone, 5,000 trade unionists are murdered in San Salvador. And the struggle goes into the rural areas. So in the north, again, what we're talking about in Chaltenango and in Arcatao, the people, the campesinos, peasant farmers, mostly support the FMLN, they support the guerrillas. So there's a decision on the part of the US State Department, on the part of the Salvadoran military to depopulate this area. So they launch a scorched earth campaign, orchestrated campaign of terror, whose sole purpose is to drive people from their communities. Example would be very close to Arcatao, what we're talking about in May of 1981. There's a massacre at the Rios, at the Sumpo River of 700, mostly women and children, and several old men. So that's 700 people butchered at the river. So this, when we're talking about PTSD, this is the context. There's this horrific campaign of terror, totally done by troops who are trained here in the United States. So the euphemism that they use is that we want to drain the sea to kill the fish. The sea are the people and the fish are the gorillas. So in 1985, I went to El Salvador, working with the UN High Commission on Refugees, to document a pattern of assassination, torture, and disappearance of healthcare workers working with refugees, and a pattern of violence directed towards refugees. While I was there in 85, I met people from a group that we still work with today called CRIPTUS, the committee, basically it's a campesino federation whose job at that time was to work with displaced peasant farmers. And we developed a plan working with CRIPTUS to have people come back to their communities of origin. And the plan was very simple. We will accompany these people who have fled, people who are now hiding in the mountains, people who are in refugee camps in Honduras, like Mesa Grande. Okay, we will accompany them as they come back to Chaltenango. Accompany and bear witness. And the reason we think this may work is because the war is totally paid for by US dollars. Every year Congress has to certify that money. Therefore, public relations matters. You have to sell the war every single year. So murdering a group of civilians who are accompanied by internationals may not be possible. It's a strategy that works. We actually get into Chaltenango and these areas are repopulated. And then we said, how do we make this sustainable, this accompaniment? Well, we can create sister cities. Madison becomes sister city with Arcatao in April of 1986. You have Cambridge with San Jose de los Flores, and a whole series of sister cities are developed. This is where we begin the work that David was talking about, which is developing this relationship, this solidarity, working on healthcare, working on all the different parts that are involved in stopping the war. And when the war does end, then there's this discussion of, do we continue the relationship? And the answer is yes, that we have a lot in common to learn from each other. And we're working on things like implementation of the peace accords, land reform, healthcare, education, environmental issues, stopping international mining of gold and cyanide extraction mining, and all these different projects. And throughout this time, one thing is very, very clear, that mental health remains a serious issue, a serious, serious issue. And it's not an issue of just this individual, these are community-based. Everybody, including their children, are experiencing PTSD. And I guess the last thing to just say is that the hallmark of our work was doing delegations, either bringing Salvadorans up to the States to tell their stories or are going down. Like David said, I went many times during the war. I've been with different groups, taking groups down. And it was through delegations that several people from Madison began a discussion with health promoters on the issue of mental health.
And you can see the groups here that we have solidarity with. In terms of the sister city networks, CRIPTES, as Marc was mentioning, we're partnering with a local chapter of CRIPTES, which is a CCR. And then in all cases, the Veterans Organization, Wounded Ex-Combatants. And very importantly, we're working with the Historical Memory Committee, the City Council, known as a Junta Directiva. And as I started, the more embedded we are with structures, the more sustainable this work is. So we're already behind time, so we'll go forward.
So Marc already talked a whole lot about the history, which is very important to understand on why this work was needed and why it's important. And we just wanted to provide a little bit more of a visual or statistic so that we can have a better understanding of the impact that the Civil War had in this community. So as you can see, about 75,000 individuals were killed. On average, 10,000 individuals were forcibly disappeared. And then it is estimated that about 85% human rights violations were done by state forces. And this is only an estimation because a lot of the people ended up fleeing the country or just being displaced. So it was very difficult to have an actual accurate number on that. And just as Marc was talking about the aid that the US does have towards the military, it was an estimated about a 5 billion quantity that was provided to them. So that could essentially take place. Next slide.
After some previous work and efforts in communications, way before the first delegation went down, we as a team for this project went to El Salvador together with members from NIA Global in April 2018. And just so that you have a sense of where we have been. Here is the map of El Salvador, and United States should be just right above, and Pacific Ocean underneath or surrounded. And then, Yazmin, if you click probably 5 times, there are 5 arrows. I pointed out where we landed and where we have been in terms of communicating with different community organized structures, practitioners, community members and leaders, and also community members in different parts of the country. So we landed in the capital city, San Salvador, and then we also visited La Libertad, the coastal city there. And then we also visited a small community, Singala, where we learned about the importance of environmental work and how the mountain during the war, what does the mountain during the war mean for the community members? And then at this up north border corner here, Chalatenango is the department name here in red. This is where Arcatal is, where the project is now delivered and has been focused on. And beyond this border is Honduras. So this picture on the left side of this slides is a good picture of the first delegation, and it was taken in Arcatal in front of the historical history museum there, and with a community member there. So with the support from the grant challenges from School of Education at UW-Madison, and also knowing that the importance of social participation, the vibrant social movement in the country, even after the war, during the reconstruction and repopulation process, and also the importance of solidarity work as part of the Salvadoran health system, social justice as an integral part of the psychology services there. So we went down there mainly to listen during the first delegation, asking questions, listening to their stories, and listening to their needs and what has been offered either within the country or by other international parties, organizations, and what we can do from that point on to meet the needs of the community. So we realize that there is a strong desire for intergenerational historical memory work and storytelling. And the intergenerational historical work is something that we're about going to work on in the next phase. And storytelling is something that the local practitioners has been doing for a couple of years now. And in terms of the types of intervention, we think that from what we have heard from the community members, leaders, and the work has been done there. So there is a collective trauma, war-related mostly. So group work is important. And also we don't want to emphasize any pathological label. We want to have a non-pathological method being culturally responsive. And also during the war, there were a lot of health promoters who were also the victims of the war. So we heard the voice from the community. There's a quote listed here saying that we're willing to listen. It's from the health promoters who were working during the war. They said that, but we're also victims. So healing the healer is really something that we heard quite often during the first delegation.
So it was very important to find practitioners that could conduct some of the work, and we wanted to localize that as much as possible. We found a psychologist that lived in Chalatenango city. Chalatenango was the department or the state that Arcatao exists in. So about 30 miles away from Arcatao, Miss Rosie Manzano was doing work, and she had many years of working with women and trauma and working with individuals that had sustained trauma from the war. We're going to talk about Martine Barreau in a few minutes, and she studied under Martine Barreau, one of the founders of liberation psychology. And so finding Rosie and working with Rosie, and Rosie has actually had 3 specific training opportunities that have been funded by the project. One is a community resiliency model in California. She was participated in that in Los Angeles, went to Bogota and participated in a trauma sensitive yoga training. And she's just recently conducted training in Mexico City on mindfulness exercises. So very importantly, the project wants to expand that scope, localize this expertise, and have a train-the-trainer model. And Rosie's been really, really instrumental in working with this project. This is Rosie right here. Claire Norell is a local practitioner that does incredible work and is certified as a trauma yoga specialist. And she's in Madison, but she's doing, she's continued this work. And in the face of COVID, we've actually been able to sustain some of these contacts. So she's doing YouTube videos and doing yoga work, virtual yoga work with individuals in the community. So Claire is not here today. We wish she was. And Hannah will be talking about some of that work that she did in the last delegation that we went down. So we're excited about the practitioners and growing expertise, localized expertise within community.
And then just for the people that are joining us via Zoom, the lady that's wearing a white shirt, that is Ms. Rosie Manzano, and then the other lady wearing purple, that's Ms. Claire Norell. Just figured I'd let you know, because I know the dynamics are a little bit interesting this way. Okay, so the second delegation took place in January 2019. Because we already had, these additional practitioners that were joining the team, this time around, Claire went ahead and flew with the rest of the team so that they could meet with Rosie Manzano. And essentially what happened is that there was a big community meeting with 22 members, and some of these members included different agencies within the community. And then ultimately, Ms. Claire and Rosie ended up conducting 4 workshops, and these 4 workshops each had like a specific topic per se or aim in population. And each workshop covered 3 specific components. So these included a psychoeducational content on mind-body connection, movement activities, and storytelling. And storytelling was something that was really like interwoven through the workshops. And then before I go into the evaluations and such, we did want to provide more context on the groups that were provided. So as you can see on your right side of the slide, we had 4 specific groups, and we went ahead and listed how many participants for each. So group 1 was more of an open group, meaning anybody could join that were interested. Group 2 was only for women. And then group 3 was for members that were part of the Historical Memory Committee. And group 4 was for ICAS, which is for wounded ex-convicts. Now we go back to the overall like evaluation and exit interview. The immediate evaluation was conducted by NIA Global Health. And the way it happened is the workshops took place, and then like the facilitators of the workshop left the room, and then representatives from that team came in and did like that evaluation. And obviously is to allow members to, you know, just be honest about like their thoughts on the workshop and stuff. Findings of that evaluation, or at least kind of some of that demographic information, is also on your right side of the slide. So about 67% of the participants were women, 33% were men. When looking at ages, the youngest was 5 years old and the oldest up to 55 years old, with the average age being 52. And then we have about 15 individuals that attended more than one workshop. And then the exit interview was conducted with several like kind of members from the agencies to kind of get their input or feedback on what could be done better in future workshops.
So in this slides, there are 2 photos presenting Rosie and Claire facilitating group sessions. And like Yazmin said, that during the second delegation, we were pretty mindful and planful about doing evaluation. And members from NIA Global did both the immediate evaluation at the end of each workshop, as well as an exit interviewing evaluation with the community leaders. So we were really happy to hear that just in general, there's a trust from the community members in this project. And also people understand that the concept of the project was a collaborative effort in terms of the history of sister city relationships and different other solidarity work that has been done prior to the launch of this project. And there are consistent positive feedback from the community members that the leaders reported. And also there was a photo on the previous slide that there are young children with one of the local coordinators from Sister City, Zuma, that we offered childcare, especially this was very helpful for group sessions for women. So that's something that the community leaders reported being very helpful, and members really appreciated that part. Yazmin, if you could flip it back. Thank you. And then, so most people felt that they had a good understanding of the workshop content, and the way that it was delivered was very easy to comprehend and to follow up and to attend. Actually, in fact, Rosie and Claire met the night before they were doing the work together. Of course, they collaborated remotely before, but that delegation, the second one, it was the first time that Rosie and Claire met, and they delivered those successful workshops to the community members. And they're also aware that we rely on their feedback. We want to hear from the members and the participants about their feelings and their feedback about the experience. So it was a developmental process during the second delegation. And similarly, from participants from the evaluation of each sessions of those workshops, and we were very happy to hear that actually they could bring those learning experiences in terms of the movement that they learned during the sessions, the meditation practices that they learned from the sessions to their daily lives. So that's something that we felt pretty rewarding hearing that. They wish that the session could be longer. It was actually long sessions. It was about 2 hours per session, but they were hoping for both more sessions and longer sessions as well. And those 4 groups were the first time that were delivered in the community in 2019. And starting from then on, Rosie Manzano, the psychologist, has been going to Arkansas at least every other week to offer different types of workshops. It's been over 20 some workshops up to today. So that's something that has been going on since the second delegation.
Our third and most recent delegation took place in February 2020. And we were able to participate in community meetings and gatherings and events with a number of different community organizations that I'll look at in a little bit. There were also individual evaluations that took place to evaluate the perception of community members of the project and its impact, as well as preferences for future directions for the supports. These evaluations were carried out by individuals who were not directly related to UW-Madison, and they took place throughout the week that, or the weekend that those individuals were in Arkansas. We were honored and privileged to witness a ritual honoring the memory of community members, loved ones that had been lost or died during the war or killed during the war. And we'll look at that later on in the presentation to talk about the significance and the intention behind the ritual. One of the big takeaways from this delegation was a well-represented group meeting with various groups that are that have some sort of relation with Arkansas. So with significant help from Rosie, we were able to engage in a meeting with folks who engage in projects all the way from environmental work with water preservation to other mental health supports with adolescents and youth, to working with women's rights on a political and national level. And from this meeting, we were able to start to work towards that collaboration, community-led ideal for this project. Another opportunity that we had during that time was that Claire Norell was able to speak about her work with the project, specifically with the body and yoga work, over the radio, so that more folks in the community were able to be exposed to the opportunities that are available to them. Dr. Rosenthal and myself left after a very short trip, and with the help of Sulma from Sister City, Claire and Rosie were able to continue to provide workshops for folks in the community, for women. Sorry, I'm just going to, it's too busy. For women, for the ex-combatants, for children, youth, and adults as well. And a lot of that work that she did through the week, she in total did 8 group sessions. She worked on alleviating emotional stress. On top of her group work, she was able to meet individually with folks who had sought out her support. And with those folks, she was able to get more in depth and work not just with emotional pain, but also with physical pain that folks had experienced, most of whom had been a result of their experience in the war. As I mentioned, Rosie also was able to carry out some group sessions. She and Claire worked together at times, much like in the the second delegation, Claire would start the 2-hour group sessions with movement and body awareness, and then transition into Rosie carrying out more of the mental health and relaxation work in those workshops. Rosie and Claire were able to work together to continue to support each other in the community resilience model training that they both engaged in. Because something that I don't think was mentioned is that the idea is that when we're training the trainer, we're doing that with at least 2 trainers, so that there can be support for each other while they're training community members. And so they were working on that together. Rosie, for Rosie to prepare for the certification. At community members' request, Claire was also able to leave some thumb drives with informational content about yoga, about mind-body connection, presentations in Spanish on the effects of trauma in the body. And we were able to leave materials for folks to continue to engage in that yoga practice once we left. I think we can move to the next slide. As Dr. Rosenthal mentioned, the supports that we have been providing have initially been created and driven by UW-Madison, and we are working towards making this a community-led, community-owned project. And so one of the ways that we are working towards that ideal is by formalizing our relationship with 2 central organizations in the community of Arcatao. So that is CCR and the ADESCO. CCR is a community chapter of that larger organization that Marc mentioned, Cryptes, and they know the people of Arcatao. They've been there for years, and this project has offered them the opportunity to engage and support folks with mental health, something that they had not been a part of before that. However, the office for CCR is located in Chalatenango, the capital of the department. And so the ADESCO then offers the project a local entity that is made up of representatives of the community and who know the needs of the people in Arcatao. Both of these are key connections that will promote the sustainability of our project. We have also made recent efforts in solidarity due to the current political situation. And that has made us consider what our role is as a mental health project. So if you're unfamiliar with some of the things that are going on in El Salvador, I won't get too into them due to time. But one of our recent efforts has been to I can't think of the word I'm trying to come up with, but I'll use a different one then. To support the Padre Miguel, the father of the Catholic Church, who is a pillar in that community. He had been ordered to leave after some of his expressions of concerns around human rights in the country at this time. And we were able to send a letter in support of his remaining in the community. And he has, I won't say that it's because of our letter, it's definitely not because of our letter, but because of the efforts of all these organizing community organizations, Padre Miguel has been able to stay in that. Other solidarity efforts, I think this could be considered one, us talking about and making sure that folks in the US are aware of the continued concerns, very serious concerns of human rights violations that are happening at the moment in the country. And as I mentioned before, as we talked about before, collaborations with these local community agencies will help make this a community-led project. And we're working towards creating those connections with other agencies.
And if I may add, it was the community-based research grant from the Marbury Center made this collaboration possible.
So we have many influencers in this project. Marc had mentioned Bishop Romero as being a central figure, and Bishop Romero was not a radical priest. He just wanted the people to have resource, and was really forced into these acts of solidarity and statements against the government. And when he told individuals, the soldiers across the country, to lay down their arms, coming from the church, that was too much for the state to handle, and he was assassinated. One of the things that we do when we go down there, we try to honor this history. So in San Salvador, this is Miss Christina Starr, one of the people that's in El Salvador, lives there, and is very interactive with the project. She provides us this very enlightened tour, if you will, where we walk the path of the bullet that killed now canonized Saint Romero. And in doing so, you realize that a vehicle pulled up, and again, supported by the US government very explicitly, and the line of sight, the Bishop Romero could see exactly what was happening. So it was, martyrdom, and he knew what was going to happen, yet he bravely stood in front of the congregation. Marc, anything you want to say about Bishop Romero? Briefly?
No, known as the voice of the poor. Basically, what you said is correct. He became the Archbishop in 1976, appointed actually because he wasn't a radical priest, but events radicalized him. And as David said, he gave a very, very famous homily calling upon the troops to obey a higher law and stop killing their brothers and sisters. And the next day he was murdered.
Thoreau really was one of the founders of liberation psychology, which is predicated on liberation theology. So we definitely, and very importantly, Rosie Manzano was trained under Martin Thoreau, and somebody from the UCA, the Jesuit University, also Dr. Cano Hernandez, was one of his disciples. So we, met with these people, and we feel Martin Thoreau's presence. We went to his office, and it's just amazing to see how close that connection is. So Thoreau was assassinated in '89, and as a psychologist, he was a priest and a psychologist, and he essentially said that psychology, as we practice in the United States and Westernized psychology, pathologizes individuals. And really, communities have the capacity to heal themselves. Communities really have to be empowered, and this isolated, individualized psychopathologizing is really counterproductive. So interestingly, and I know we're running out of time, but because we want have time for questions, I spent over a year trying to get permission to just do a survey on mental health in the community on an individual basis. And it was called the PERMA model, which is a very positive psychology-oriented, non-pathologizing mechanism to say, well, how are you doing as an individual in terms of life meaning and engagement and resilience, et cetera. And it took so long to get through the IRB just because we were working in trauma and in an international capacity. And I went down there prepared, even though it was positive psychology, I couldn't do it. I couldn't give people these surveys and then retest them later thinking, that this is going to be advantageous for us in terms of data, et cetera. It just didn't seem right. So we're just listening to the community and doing qualitative research and reaching out in very different ways. And as Martin Thoreau said, the psychometrics associated with our psychological premises are very counterproductive. So everything's been really in a community orientation as opposed to, looking at an individual and saying, how are you? Now, Thoreau said, very importantly, that you could say that, well, his premise is counter to like the community resiliency model, because within that model, you look at pathology within an individual, and we know that trauma resides within individuals, et cetera. But Rios says, yes, you have to work with the individual. However, you simultaneously have to address all the systemic political aspects in terms of the social context. Women's rights, we.
Dave, before you.
Yeah.
If you had just asked me to.
Okay.
So I'll be really quick. First of all, one important point here is Burroughs' work comes out of what we might call liberation theory, which comes from liberation theology. Anything you do, if you're teaching adult literacy, it can be framed in a way that's its primary objective is social justice, social transformation, healthcare, same thing. Here's psychology. When David Tiddy was assassinated, this event was actually very critical. The war was bookmarked by two events, both brought about by the Apikat Battalion trained at the School of the Americas here. One, Apikat Battalion in 1980 carried out the massacre at El Mozote, which some of you may have heard, where there's 1,200 women and children murdered. 1989, at the UCA, the Jesuit University, the Apikat Battalion went into the university, murdered 6 Jesuits who were seen as the intellectual visionaries of this revolution, just because they talked about social change, their housekeeper and her daughter. And when I talked about the warhead to be sold, this was the moment at which we could no longer sell the war. When it became exposed that they had murdered Martin Barreau and 5 other Jesuits. Very important in terms of the trajectory of this work. Sort of the beginning and the end of the war.
I think in the interest of time, I'll just say that we had really amazing people that we were interfacing with that really informed us about women's rights, public health needs, mental health needs. So these were very, very influential individuals that we've had meetings with and were influencers of the project. So I think move on in the interest of time.
And we just wanted to go ahead and point out the guiding lights and principles of this overall project. First and foremost, just thank the overall community for allowing us to work with them and being so welcoming for the many times that the team has gone to visit them. And just point out 3 specific kind of aspects of this. So as it was mentioned, the community resilience model that is assuring that both our practitioners received so that they were able to or more adequate to facilitate the workshops and such. And this is a model by Dr. Eleni Miller-Carras. And then just again, emphasize Martin Barro's writing and visions of liberation psychology that essentially was the heart and soul of the project. And then historians, Dr. Stephen Stern and Dr. Molly Todd, because they really provided us a lot of assistance with understanding the historical background of this particular country and the overall dynamics of what's been going on through history with them. So we do have a couple of slides with recommendations, but because of time, I may not be able to go through all the specific bullets, but one that we did want to make sure we had the time for was the specific recommendations when it comes to this project, working directly with this community, is that it was recommended that workshops had some type of a childcare aspect, because a lot of them may be single parents, or maybe they just absolutely have no one else to care for their children when they're attending, as well as kind of giving them a fair amount of time so that they can plan ahead on attending these workshops. Ideally have the workshops in the afternoon, because that seemed to work best for the community members within Arcatao. And then also a time send actual individual invitations, because that was more encouraging to have them attend these workshops. They also wanted to have more workshops so they could share more of their personal stories. And then also just they wanted more specific about the outcome expectations of attending to these workshops. Now, when we want to be a little bit more broad and think of what are some recommendations if you want to do some of this, I would say work, I won't have the time to read through all of these, so I'll pause. I'm assuming this is gonna be recorded and posted, so for those watching the recording, you can go ahead and pause the video and read this over. And I do apologize that I cannot go through all of these.
If I may just highlight one thing, and Yazmin, if you could go back to the previous general recommendation slide. We've talked, most of them actually throughout the presentation up to now, but we talked about the importance of solidarity, but also we want to be mindful and not impose assumptions of solidarities in every situation. So that's something that we learned from the community, and we are continuing to communicating with them in terms of the best way of providing the perspectives from the project. Okay.
To end,
I was just pausing for like 2
Oh,
seconds.
yeah.
Go ahead.
we have a lot of recommendations, a lot of dreams for the project. And to end, I just wanted to, before we go into questions, I wanted to mention the memorialization ritual that has taken place in Arcatao a number of times. The first one being on November 1st. November is an important month and chosen intentionally. It's a day, a month that people remember lost loved ones. And so that was the whole purpose behind this memorialization ritual. There were so many lives that were lost in moments that people didn't have the time or the energy to process in that moment. For many, they didn't have the bodies there and were unable to engage in the rituals around the burial process of loved ones. They may have been far away from them and they weren't able to process that. And so this ritual is, as you can see from the quote, our psychologist Rosie Manzano said that really it's the idea was to open a space to process that loss the loss of those lost loved ones who had passed away during the armed conflict, who had died during it and been killed during it, and an opportunity to say goodbye and recognize the resilience that the community members have and the community as a whole has. You can see on the left-hand side, we have a picture of an altar. The materials in that were chosen very intentionally. There were, as Marc mentioned earlier on, there was a massacre at the Rios pool, and there were stones that were gathered by community members before this ritual and brought to be placed in the altar. There were seeds that signified life and growth, and there were fruits that were collected by community members to put in the altar. There were the candles to signify light and life. All of these were chosen very intentionally. Another important component that we don't have a picture of, I apologize, was the planting of a tree. This was able to signify something very important that happens during a burial ritual in El Salvador, where they throw dirt on the tomb, or as they're burying someone. And each community member was able to throw dirt onto this tree that would, in time, provide fruit for the community. And finally, there was an earlier picture in the third delegation. If you want to go back to that, oh, sorry, you don't have to go back to that, Yazmin, but if other people want to, there's a picture of balloons in the sky. And I just wanted to end with recognizing that the community members during the ritual were able to write a note or have somebody else write a note to their loved one, for their loved one, about their loved one, just saying what they needed to say, and then putting it on the balloon and letting it go. And so this was able to signify honoring their loved one and letting them go.
And there are ongoing exhumations going on by the Historical Memory Committee. And these in the background here behind the picture of St. Romero are bodies, graves.
And with that,
I would like to end with one of my favorite quotes, and that is, El Salvadorans can walk in the dark because they emanate their own light.